Can you tell us what group that is, Fred?
Yes, I was just typing it. This is the Dirty Dozen Brass Begins. Album is Don't Fail Me Now in honor of Mardi Gras, which is the day before Fat Tuesday, which is today.
Welcome to class.
Hello.
How's everybody doing?
Good.
Doing good.
Yeah, no problems.
All right. Everybody's hanging in with the weather, I hope. It's a little dramatic out there these days, but guess we're all Michiganders, so it shouldn't be that new.
At least the snow was nice and light, so shoveling wasn't too bad. It wasn't like that heavy, wet snow.
Yeah.
Wait till tomorrow.
Yeah, out our way, we got a lot of it. It is the light, fluffy snow, but it's been coming down just about every day, it seems like, for
I know.
last week. So anyways, we'll get right into it. Welcome again. I appreciated your vision assignments. I thought everybody did pretty well. I wanted to state one thing that seemed common, and it is very common to anybody doing vision exercises, is that challenge of kind of getting into the future present tense, as I call it, which is talking about it as if you were there in the future, in the present, saying, this is what I see, this is what's happening, versus it's what we're going to do. I didn't take anything away from it. It wasn't something that I was marking down for, but it was a consistent shift and made me think maybe I didn't instruct that as clearly, or maybe it's just one of the things that everybody struggles with, because when you're looking into the future and you're talking about a business that doesn't exist yet, it's natural to say, this is what I hope is going to happen, but I'm not really sure. But the exercise of visioning is pretending it happened. And so what is that you want it to be? And that actual exercise of putting yourself in the future is one of the things that'll clarify and have you make some decisions about, well, what do I really see? So that's one thing I would say universally I want to encourage you all to think about if you move forward to actual vision statements. Some of these sounded like they were real for real businesses, and if they are and you move forward, I would just encourage that bigger shift. But I thought everybody dug in, and sounds like 8 places I need to go visit soon. So thanks for participating there. Today, we're going to go through regulatory environment and talk a little bit about the difference between what we've been through so far and what are kind of the rules of operating instead of just the licenses. It will have some overlap in terms of it's going to also include talking about licenses. But it's just more of the rules of engagement. Again, it's somewhat of the drier variety, but it's really important to note the difference and to note who regulates what and what happens after license. Now you're into operating, you're not getting check boxes to say, that's another one of the differences is the licensure happens. They make you go through a certain amount of process to check all the boxes and then say, okay, now you're good to go. There's a clear delineation of now you hung the thing on the wall. After that, you don't get as much oversight. They're not coming by to make sure you're doing things right. So you could be digging a deeper and deeper hole for yourself and not know it if you're not paying attention to the rules, because they're not checking on you until they do. So it's really important to understand the difference, and so that you can kind of self-regulate, no pun really intended there. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And we have quiz number 2, which covers not this week, but it covers weeks 2, 3, and 4. That's up, and I'm going to do my best to end at 7:30. So you have a half-hour class time to take that. It's available until 9, and you have 2 attempts to take it. So hopefully everything works well there. And that's just, let me know if there's ever, if you see anything about that doesn't work. I feel like these quizzes are probably available. You could probably take them in a half hour, but if you want to take a little time with them, I'm allowing that, and trying to make that available. But also not necessarily require outside of class time to take them. So that's that. And maybe, I guess, as we do questions for this week, you're also invited to ask any questions you have about leading into the quiz. So if you've got something that you're not sure about, you want clarification on before you take that quiz, we can do that at the end of this session, right before the quiz. Everybody good with that? All right. So we'll go to the slides. 1 second here. Okay. So government regulations, main thing which we've covered and will continue to cover is that you've got two parents, federal and state. No matter what state you're in, that's going to be true. How your state works, what they require, what their rules are is going to change. There's going to be similarities, but the most important thing is to understand you need to be licensed by both and follow rules of both. So the TTB is the federal version, the Tax and Trade Bureau, or the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, formerly BATF. Their function, here it says main function, which is probably debatable, but they're collecting taxes. They're also issuing licenses and overseeing this very basic functionality of, yes, you're cleared to operate, and we have a path for tax collection. The federal license to brew is called a brewer's notice. And for distilling, it's the distilled spirit plant, otherwise referred to as DSP. So that's your federal clearance to operate, either one. And you're going to likely need to clear members and stockholders that own a minimum of 10% of the organization, which is going to involve background checks, references, and everything. So they want to know who's operating the brewery, and they start that with investors 10% or larger. So on the brewing side of things, here's just a few facts. Home brewing, as we heard last week, became legal in 1978. There were state implications, as we heard a couple weeks ago with Ted Badgerow. The Michigan didn't identify homebrewing as legal in the state until the late 90s. I think it was 97 or so, but federally that was 1978. Anyways, adults can produce without payment of tax and without brewer's notice up to 100 gallons in a calendar year. Again, there's nobody checking that, but if you were, it's just one of those things that if you were in gross violation and you said, well, nobody told me that I couldn't produce 500 gallons annually, they're going to say, it doesn't matter. It's the law and you're in trouble. So I don't know why that's necessarily important here, other than that it is a distinction between beer and spirits. And the reality is, as a potential professional brewer, you're operating within the law to get fairly robust in your brewing operation, as long as you're following those gallonage limits. And they do say there, if you intend to make beer for other than family or personal use, TTB must approve your operations. Now, I'm not your lawyer or legal advisor. I think the big delineation they would make there, though, is sale. So you do not want to be selling homebrew, regardless of whether it's family, but that would be the way they would say this is no longer personal use. And two things are wrong with this. We didn't get any tax from it, and you're operating without a license. So I think that's a good distinction, but I would be very comfortable if I wanted to test batch my brews for the brewery I was going to make. I would just be very aware that I didn't want to break rules on my way into the profession. anyways, no reason to spend more time on that. The link is there for getting a brewer's notice. So in the distilled spirits, distilling at home for any reason is prohibited if you don't have a permit, and the violations are somewhat the punishment for violations is significant. So you're going to need approval to distill in any way. I can wax on a little bit of the reason there. There's two reasons. There's the spirit overall, and that there's more of a history of poorly distilled spirits hurting people, including alcohols that are dangerously strong or not necessarily balanced for consumption. So there's a public health regard there. And then the other sort of public safety regard is if you're dealing with high proof spirits and open flame, then there's a significant fire hazard. So it'd be a lot worse than a turkey cooker blowing up in your backyard if you blew up a vat of high proof spirit in your garage. So there are reasons, and distiller beware. So the federal government regulation, the TTB, is also issuing a COLA, which is a certificate of label approval. Now, because of the amount of things we need to get to and just what I thought was important for this class, I'm not going to break down the number of stipulations for beer and spirits that are in the COLAs. But if you go there and look at it, you will be able to read that code. But for today's purpose, the reality is that any product you sell, I think there are some exceptions, but I'll get to that in a second. Any product you sell into the market in a package, or the consumer's receiving a packaged good, needs a COLA. So you're going to need to have the Surgeon General's warning on it. You're going to need the volume, so 12 ounces, 16 ounces. At a certain strength, I think it's above 6%, won't be on the test, but it's in the code. At a certain strength, you need to identify alcohol. Below a certain strength, you do not. So these things are illustrated, and they're basically standardizing what a consumer can expect to find on a label. So you're going to have the place of origin. Gets a little weird where they don't always identify the parent company, so that can be branded, but you're going to have especially fluid ounces, strength, place of origin, Surgeon General warning, and that is federal. Now, the exceptions I was talking about, and it would be important for you to check this when you're working on opening and operating versus just going by whatever is current, because I'm pausing because, well, it's been a year or two since I dealt with this. So, but the draft beer for a pub, in the past, all draft beer still needed a COLA for the keg collar. So you still needed to identify that product to the person who was serving it. Now, if the bar is tapping the keg, there's no label, there's no Surgeon General wording on the tap handle. They're just pouring that beer. But one could still reasonably find out the strength of that beer, the maker of that beer, and all the pertinent details that the government considers standard because it's on the keg. Now, where that got a little loose, and I think there's been a variation, and I apologize for not checking that today, but brew pubs, there was a loosening on whether nobody was really following it anyways, but COLAs can take a month to get approved. They're somewhat of a complicated federal process. So you think about a brew pub who's not selling beer in packages. Do they need to get a label approval for this month's new IPA? And there was a loosening there that I don't have. But in the past, you were supposed to. But whether your inspector knew that, nobody really enforced it. So it was one of those very unfollowed regulations. But distributing breweries, certainly being draft only, didn't excuse them from that label process. So that's something that you should always check. And the main thing that I want you to understand is that the feds are the ones saying, listen, provide either the retailer or the consumer at least a basic level of information on your product going out the door. That is specified in code. So the federal government also has reporting requirements. So you're going to need a monthly report of production. What alcohol was made on site? What do you have in process? What's in inventory? And what excise tax is due? Now, your liability, your tax liability, if you're small, under $50,000 of tax annually, you're going to be able to report quarterly. Above that, you're going to report semi-monthly. So reporting is an additional requirement to paying. So it's very important that you have a system to manage your data, and remember that these rules and these systems of reporting were born in a time where they were battling a black market coming out of prohibition. So they're very serious about wanting to know where the alcohol is. And the fact that we're not in bootlegging times doesn't really matter. Their process of wanting to know where the alcohol is and that you're responsible for it and the taxes is a significant part of their relationship with you. So that, I think, from an advice point of view, besides just a knowledge point of view, it's like, make sure you know who's taking care of this and that there's a competent system in place, versus just we'll figure that out when we get there. All right. So federal excise tax rates, actually replaced this slide, so I'm going to skip ahead. So the craft, this is one thing where I did look up what is current, because there was a change in December of 2020. So the Craft Beverage Modernization Act recently passed, which made some temporary tax relief, tax adjustments for small producers permanent, and did a couple of other things. But in general, this can be a lot to read. The yellow part here is saying, so brewers under 2 million barrels are paying $3.50 per barrel on the first 60,000 barrels. Everybody else above that is paying $16 per barrel to their first 6 million barrels, and then 18 above that. Okay, so 2 million barrels is a lot of beer. 6 million barrels is a lot of beer. You're talking the largest 2 million was the craft designation where Sam Adams was. Now they're at or nearing they're not near 6 million, but they've moved that line from 2 million to 6 million as breweries approached it. This is just another breakdown of that. So unless you're planning on opening a 2 million or 6 million barrel brewery, the important thing to note is that 60,000 barrels is a demarcation line between $3.50 per barrel and $16 per barrel. So the good news is that that language has been changed to say your first 60,000 barrels, or has been addressed, I should say. Otherwise, at 61,000 barrels, you would owe $12.50 for those first 60,000 barrels. So that would be a very painful threshold to cross. And the way it's written now is saying, okay, first 60,000 barrels is still a small brewer rate because you're a small brewer, less than 2 million annually. So those barrels are going to stay at that rate. But once you're over it, you're going to be paying more. So the assumption is that the larger brewers have economies of scale and opportunities the small brewers don't. So the cost of poker is different. But if a brewery were starting to get near that line, they're going to need a plan. Have they addressed, because their whole cost structure is going to change when those taxes go up. So this class and this week isn't to figure out the methodology of what to do there. It's more important to note that this is a federal excise tax and brewers pay different rates based on the size of their brewery. Frank, did you have a question?
Yeah, Fred, is that tax on sold barrels of beer or on produced barrels of beer?
Excise tax is a good question. Excise tax is on sold. So that's one of the reasons that inventory reporting and production, inventory, and sold are all important numbers because it has to balance. You know, we made 200 barrels. I have 50 in inventory. So 150 was sold. Those need to add up so that every barrel is accounted for. That's unsold.
What about losses? Is there like a margin of error for that sort of thing?
Yes, there is. So you're pulling losses out, and most reporting systems, and these days there's a lot of good apps and programs that are managing brew logs and transfer losses. So losses are taken out, assuming that you can identify them with proper production logs. Meaning, I don't know where it went isn't a loss, but we have a brew log where we made X amount of barrels. We lose this percentage in transfer. We lose another percentage in filter. We lose another percentage at package. And here we keep track of that for every batch. So our production number is X. That's going to be the difference maker in whether or not you can take those losses out. And that's, by design, so that somebody's not able to say, I lost 100 barrels of beer and then sell it out the side door without taxes, which would have been a common practice back in the day. None of you honest people would ever do such a thing, but the government wants it on paper. So there's also spirits are also included in the Craft Beverage Modernization Act. So they're paying $2.70 per proof gallon on the first 100,000 proof gallons removed, and $13.34, so $11 per proof gallon on the next 22 million proof gallons. So I think we're probably all short of that. But still, that's a significant difference. And there's a couple things to celebrate here. One, the fact that small producers have been recognized and that these are no longer, for decades, for my whole career, it was every couple year battle of, they wanted to repeal this excise relief for small brewers, or it would be on the trading block to get something else done, to say, well, do this, or we're going to come after that relief you have. And so this act, which was part of COVID relief that went down in late December, has identified these as permanent rates. So it would take a much larger act to change these, which is always possible, but different than a undefined temporary relief. So I didn't put the formula here, and I don't know that we might get to it when it comes into pricing week. It's a little more operational, but I'll explain the concept of proof gallons, and then we can do the math later because it's a little tricky, and we'll probably gauge how important it is in this class. So a proof gallon is a way to equalize, to mathematically normalize between different strengths of alcohol. So it's saying if everything were 100 proof and a gallon, that's what we're going to count by. So if you have something that's 20 proof, it's going to take 5 of them to make a gallon. If you have 80 proof, it takes 1 and a something, So there's formulas and math so that if you want to track your volume in proof gallons, it depends on what spirit, each spirit's alcohol quantity matters. So if you're doing high proof spirits, you can see you have a lot more alcohol in a case if it's 198 proof, than alcohol at 28 proof, which is a liqueur that has a lot of other things in it besides alcohol. So if they were taxed at the same rate for that cordial as somebody for Everclear, that would be out of balance in terms of trying to tax the alcohol versus the product. And that's different than how beer is handled. In terms of tax, a beer is a beer. With spirits, not so much. And so that's another thing where somebody's in the organization's got to be capable of doing that math and keeping track of things in a few different ways. Then another thing, so transfer and bond of non-bulk distilled spirits is also in this act. So that means that you could buy bottles of spirits or some other container and still go bond to bond, pre-excise tax and pre-sale, meaning I could buy bottled whiskey or whatever and resell it, where it's prior to 2018, non-bulk or bottled distilled spirits for beverage purposes were prohibited. So you had to buy barrels or bulk containers of some sort. I want to go back for a second to beer. This bond to bond, I've got more homework to do on bond to bond brewers, because this makes it federally legal. Now, I didn't think that was legal in Michigan, so I'm not sure if there's a state prohibition. That should be looked up, but this transfer of beer and bond is relatively modern in and of itself, and this is saying that it's making permanent the temporary authorization. So that would mean that a contract brewer could sell, well, they don't have to be a contract brewer. A brewer could sell finished beer to another brewer before they sold it under their license. Now, my suspicion is that this is not yet legal in Michigan. But I made, I don't necessarily get the memo, so they could have changed that, and I'll look into that for you. But in either case, there's now federal ruling for that. And what we've seen with, and if you remember in Mark's talk, state regs, if they're not additional to federal, like federal excise tax, state excise tax, if they're not an additional thing, if there's something that's legal federally, but the state doesn't want it to be legal, then it's not legal. So the states have authority in terms of rules and regulations in terms of what that licensee can or cannot do. That authority transfers to the state under feds. So the federal laws are also true, but they're true in relationship to what the state also allows. Does that make sense to everybody? It can get a little weird. So, okay, so that's the Modernization Acts and that's excise taxes. Moving on, we covered some of this in business models, but this starts to specify. One, we've shifted, you can see by the logo, we've shifted to Michigan. So now we're in state licenses, and a brewer's license is not limited in production of volume. They can sell to licensed wholesalers. They may not sell to licensed retailers. They may sell to consumers for home consumption at one location only. That needs to be updated. That location has increased. 1 second while I note that. Not sure, but I think it's 3. You can sample at the brewery, and then there's fees. And by the way, this link down here is the same on every slide. So this is where you would find out these rules. Microbrewer license, up to 60,000 barrels of beer annually, may sell to licensed wholesalers, may not sell to retailers unless they're a qualified microbrewer producing under 2,000 barrels annually. They may sell to consumers for home consumption. that is to go. And now with COVID, they also allowed delivery, which is a temporary provision. I think will be interesting to see how that goes. And may permit sampling at the brewery. Sampling not being flights, sampling is offering somebody to taste the beer for no charge. So a regular retail license isn't technically, they're not allowed to give away alcohol. Now, whether they allow somebody to sample or not, nobody really notices. The idea that this is identified as saying that sampling no charge alcohol is legal at this license. Brew pub license, limited to 18,000 barrels of beer, must also hold on premise. You've heard me say it as Class C license. Must operate full service restaurant with at least 25% of gross sales from non-alcoholic items. Read food. If it says non-alcoholic items in the code, which I'm assuming it does, that would be interesting because you could maybe have a soda company or something else. But I mean, generally speaking, this is interpreted as food. You may not sell to licensed wholesalers or retailers. The way I've always described this to people in a less licensed bullet point way is that if you're selling alcohol to licensed organizations, to distributors, you can't buy from them, that they wanted a one-way street there, that alcohol isn't crossing in both directions between two companies. Now, there's been a little mixture allowed there since then, but that was always sort of the understanding. They may sell to consumers for on and off premise consumption. Sampling is permitted at a brew pub. So that's the brew pub license. Small distiller, as we heard last week or 2 weeks ago, the small distiller was introduced in Michigan in 2008. So it's up to 60,000 gallons of spirits annually, may sell directly to consumers. I'm pretty sure that this, if I remember correctly, this gallons not being defined as proof gallons is a little bit of ambiguous language because it was written in a time where it was less common to do. So I believe that's gallons and not proof gallons. But I remember dealing with that and there being some confusion as to what was intended there, which is not common in a new license, not uncommon in a new license. So they can also sell, so they can sell directly to consumers. That's the tasting room idea. And whether it's on premise or to go, but they can also sell through Michigan Liquor Control Commission Spirit ADA distribution system, which we'll get to in a second. It's an authorized delivery agent. And then there's a fee, no limit on locations. Each location must be licensed. So then manufacture of spirits is what existed prior to the small distiller, and it exceeds 60,000 gallons. And it can only sell through the ADA system, and there's no direct sales to consumers allowed. So if you're a big distiller, you don't have these allowances for that the small distiller has. You know, and you could ask, you know, why are some of these things written this way? Well, it's some of that same protection idea of the marketplace that we talked about in franchise law, that it sometimes gets distorted over time when some of the business changes. But if, you know, if Jim Beam could dot the countryside with tasting rooms and sell directly to consumer, they could really disrupt the market and cause some imbalance. And so as rules get changed, there's usually an idea, like they want to treat businesses fairly, but they also want to encourage certain types of business and especially allow for local investment. And so a lot of these things are written in a way that, okay, if we manage size and we manage something that's manageable, it's going to help our industry in some way. And I don't want to necessarily get into the debate on some of those whys, but it's just interesting to think about it yourself, like what's happening here and what are they trying to prevent and what are they trying to allow. The reason that one might do that is it can help you figure out how to navigate through. And to me, it also just it lessens some of the, I don't know, frustration or emotion of why can't we do this? If I think, oh, well, certain things, if this were wide open, we probably wouldn't have this opportunity in the first place. Okay, so control states. First off, it's understanding, we spoke about this a little bit last week. First thing is to understand what it is. A control state is basically where the state is maintaining a more than regulatory relationship with the sale of alcohol, which may mean that they themselves are the mechanism for that alcohol to be sold. This can mean that they manage the distribution, or it can mean they manage actual retail stores. I've got to go to the state store to buy alcohol is a thing in certain states. And this graphic is showing you where there are control states in the country. And it's much more common for them to control spirits. Green, our friends in Utah, control beer, wine, and spirits. And so the trend seems to be for this to be changing, loosening in general, but some places would probably be a long time before you see change. I will also say, when you're talking about locations, I didn't include it here, and I don't know if it's relevant other than to understand the power and the sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? The authority that the states have. There are, and as it goes further to local government, in Kentucky, there's like 45 dry counties where no alcohol is sold in the county. So as you become more localized, they have opportunities to refine their alcohol regulations. And even though alcohol may be legal in the state, it doesn't mean that it's legal in that county. So it's always important to figure out your local provisions as well as state and federal. So talking about control state in regards to Michigan, it's only distilled spirits, and a vendor of spirits sells those spirits directly to the MLCC. The MLCC resells it to the on and off premise retailers. However, in between that step, they are warehoused and delivered by an authorized delivery agent, otherwise known as ADA. MLCC, Michigan Liquor Control, is also setting a minimum retail selling price for spirits. So usually, like a retailer might advertise that we're selling at state minimums, meaning they're not going above it. Well, they're not allowed to go below it. So the state is basically normalizing pricing to keep retailers from incenting sale via price. So again, that seems confusing. Why would they set a minimum price? Well, they want normalcy here, and there's usually a lot of regulations will, if you could imagine something that would have induced volume or poor behavior, then that's where rules come in. So, hey, I've got the cheapest booze in town, isn't necessarily considered a great thing from a regulatory body trying to keep things even keel. For instance, a lot of states have they have happy hour rules. I think Michigan does too, but I remember a long time ago when those first went into place, you can't advertise an alcohol promotion at retail for a specified amount of time. From 4 to 6, drinks are half off, because that's going to encourage consumption at a rate based on revenue and pricing and access to cheap alcohol instead of responsible consumption and the enjoyment of the beverage. If people are getting drunk because of the prices, the government can say, well, we can do something about that. And back, in the 70s and 80s, that was a real significant issue. No longer an issue because it's no longer permitted. So, that's that. Yes.
Oh, I was just, I was just starting to think about this progressive and regressive tax system that we have, and and it's like, for the poorest people, people that have the least amount of money, the taxing system on these kinds of things are the most regressive. Like the lotto is like 100% tax unless you win. If you lose, you just paid 100% tax. And the people that buy these kinds of things, like especially the lotto, and I'm thinking a lot of alcohol sales, packaged things, from the gas stations and liquor stores, are really the people that are the least economically able to pay taxes, and it's like a punishment for being poor. Is these kinds of taxes on these spirits, cigarettes, things like that. I mean, they're the ones that, as a percent of their income, are paying tremendous amounts as a percent.
Yeah, and that is a familiar argument about what reform might be needed. I will say that the whole idea of excise tax is that, and not my idea, but the origin is that it is on products that aren't considered necessary, so they're available to be taxed differently. So that does have a different relationship. I think that getting away from that point for a second and moving into this minimum retail selling price, there are some advantages to it. It can seem very restrictive, but on the other hand, that and other rules that we have for beer in Michigan, we are a volume discounting for beer from distributor to retailer is prohibited. And this minimum retail selling is another version of another way of accomplishing that, which is saying that Costco, with a membership fee selling huge amounts of product, can't get a lower price on their alcohol, and they can't sell it for lower. So it is a normalizing that sometimes works the other way of saying, listen, if you buy this bottle in the whatever neighborhood you buy it at, whether you buy it at the corner store or you buy it at the warehouse store, it's going to cost the same. So it's actually this sort of methodology is sometimes viewed as a counter to that regressive tax idea. So, and in other states, Illinois, for instance, and many others, volume discounting is allowed, especially in beer. So the wholesaler can say, here's the frontline price. Frontline price is $25. Buy 25 cases and I'll give it to you for $23. Buy 100 cases and I'll give it to you for $20. So then the big stores can buy the product for less, and then they can sell it for less. So, and in this case, in this state for beer, if Meijer or Costco wants to sell a beer for less than their neighbor, they can, but it's coming out of their margin. They didn't buy it for any less. So here's another point about local government approval is required, city, township, village, etc. So step one of a license process should be contacting the local government to review any zoning or ordinance obstacles. I think step one to acquiring property should be talking about that. If it needs to be rezoned and you can't be rezoned until you exist, you can still take the temperature. You can still meet with the planning committee. You can still say, What's the likelihood of this? What are the things in front of me? So you can gauge your risk. And if you get the feeling that there ain't going to be no breweries in this township as long as I'm on the planning committee, then you could think about another township or running for a planning committee. But if there's a process and you need to be the property owner in order to request that change, we talked a lot about that already. Well, okay, then you can gauge that risk and you might need to move forward without necessarily having your zoning in place. Or, I say zoning because it's some of my experience with stuff, especially when you're out in the country. But if you're in a commercial district, you may have a zoning issue in terms of your commercial, but they want to, if they consider breweries manufacturing, there may need to be an add-on. Depends on what type of brewery, whether they view you as a restaurant. If you're a distiller, you're definitely going to need some revision because there are less distillers that have moved through these local governments. So they may not have seen it before. And there's going to be a different fire, public safety assessment. So they're going to want to process it differently and make sure that they're okay having you. And that's distilling is interesting because your downtown commercial markets are a little more sensitive, because if you blow up your building, you're going to blow up the block. And if you're out in the country, no big deal. And then if you're out in the country, a lot of times their concern is traffic. Are the roads built to manage retail traffic? They don't have sewers necessarily. So what are you doing with your waste? So manufacturing in a rural area brings certain shifts that a community wants to be assured are being addressed. And that's the whole idea of zoning and ordinances in a nutshell. And brewing and distilling does bring nuances that if they already have breweries in that particular area, whether it be downtown or otherwise, then they've probably already figured it out. And all you got to do is check the boxes. If they haven't, then there's a process. And the fact that we have so many producers means communities have gone through this process. It's possible. But you want to get that before moving forward, or at least have a sense of it. MLCC isn't going to move forward if you don't have support of your local government.
Hey, Fred.
Yeah.
Just something that I was like Costco in Livonia. I was in there and I was just wondering why they weren't selling liquor. All they have is beer and wine. And I asked the manager was there, and I was asked why, because most of all the other ones have liquor. And he said his explanation to me is they keep going to try to get to the local government there to get their liquor, to be able to sell liquor. And what he informed me is Livonia, with all around that whole area there, they get all the people that are all the places that are selling liquor. They go up to as the township, as the city meetings and everything. They band together. There's they have a club or a committee together, and they go forward and they protest against it, and they have really been successful in keeping them from getting their liquor license, and to be able to sell liquor, and to if there's other stores that want to get one, he said it's kind of, they all work together and they try to, allow, they want to be able to allow and not allow where certain stores can sell liquor in that. That was.
Yeah. So I don't know the specifics there, but it would be interesting. I think they would have a hard time. They would have a hard time prohibiting a similar store with a similar license type from opening just because they didn't like them. So if, Paul's Liquors was operating and Sarah's Liquors wanted to operate, and the businesses looked pretty similar and they had the same license, it would be very difficult for one licensee to say, I don't want Sarah to operate here. On the other hand, if I'm guessing that they have identified a warehouse retailer as a different beast. And so they're saying, we are asking as local business, this is my speculation without knowing the case at all. We as local businesses are asking you to not grant this license to retailers of this type. So Sam's Club would have the same treatment as Costco as somebody else in that category, is my guess as to what's happening. And that's, it's interesting, and it's part of that localization that the local government is going to be looking to do what's best for their community and what does their committee think is best. And so if you take that away from just being Costco story and say, if you were of the business model that a community was not interested in welcoming, you would want to know that prior to putting too many pieces in.
I'm just saying, because that's, talking to them, that's why he says they go up there every year to try to get it, but they get shut down.
Yeah, well, and they're at a distinct disadvantage because they're not a locally owned business. They have all the sort of history of their opposition has a lot of ammunition to say, here's why. Now Costco would have their ammunition as well. It's going to be this many jobs. But if they exist already and they're selling goods, they have the same number of jobs they'd have with or without liquor. So anyways, I don't want to get off track, but that's a great example of how local it can be. And so, and that one setting isn't necessarily better or worse than the other setting. They're unique, and you've got to evaluate what are the things you want to do, and do they fit in this particular locale, both structurally in terms of does it work, and is it allowed? Those are both sort of, again, that vision versus strategy line is interesting, and it starts here at this localized level. Food service, you're going to need a food service is not included in your brewery license in terms of authority. So that's going to be county health and Department of Ag. So just realize that if you're making and serving food, you have a third parent, which is now the health department. So you're going to have that certification and pass those inspections. So you're getting inspected for both actions that you're operating. All right, so licensing and regulatory affairs. I think the common pronunciation is Lara. That's how I've always said it in my head. So Lara is going to enforce parts of this, and these are some of the guidelines. So, and MLCC and Lara is really your corporate regulations, and there's some intersections there, but here are some bullet points to be aware of. You must be 18 to sell. Law enforcement has the right to search a licensed establishment. The responsibility for validating drinking age of the consumer is the seller's responsibility, etc. This is where growlers are. So some common violations are listed here. For the sake of time, I'm going to kind of keep moving here and not necessarily go through each one of these. But the idea is that what I want to point out is that the liquor code is different than the license, right? The license has very broad strokes in terms of here's what you can operate. The liquor code, and when we get next into promotion, has detailed rules, and both need to be known and followed. But the detailed rules are a little bit more day-to-day operations versus how many places do you have, and did you pay your taxes, and are you capable of having this license, and are you in the right, have all the governmental bodies approved your existence, is one broad stroke. Now, are you following the rules during today's service is sort of another level of granularity that is important to be aware of. And it may be different people that need to be aware of it. So executives and owners, leaders are probably dealing with the big picture licensing stuff. Do we have all the things in place to get our license? A GM or an assistant manager or a server are all doing things that could break or follow a rule. So it only takes a bartender to sell to a minor or not check ID to have breached that code. And so realizing that the rules are fundamental to a broader employee base, meaning you got to be teaching, you got to be developing systems of training and your own sort of enforcement. It's such a harsh word, but the reality is you should be checking your staff for following those rules prior to the state checking. So if you have your own systems to sort of reward and review your protocols when it comes to all these almost countless rules, that's going to be really helpful to keeping you out of trouble. So on-premise promotion regulations. So this is a shift and the wording can be confusing. So here, I might even want to revise these a little. The liquor code violations, this is talking about you operate, the brewer or distiller being the seller to the consumer. So these are on-site sales in our tasting rooms, right? This next one that says on-premise, the tricky part about this is now we're talking about a licensed retailer, an on-premise retailer, not the producer of alcohol. So this is talking about, I want to have, Gage's distillery night at a local retailer. These are the rules associated with that. So you're supposed to register your promotion by submitting a form to the MLCC 5 days in advance. You're not supposed to have more than 3 promotions per month per retailer account. You're supposed to have a licensed or rep, either from the supplier or the wholesaler present, so that if people are saying, tonight's the night, we're whatever we're doing, they want people brand, they want representatives of the brand present. You're not supposed to give away more than $100 in value. Alcohol shall not be a condition to receive merchandise. This is very important because other states may have this written differently. So depending on where you grew up or where you visited, somebody saying, buy a beer and get a burger or get something else is totally legal. Here it is not. It's an incent to buy the alcohol. So in general, if you get that idea of we're not supposed to, which is really difficult because what is promoting alcohol if not incenting people to purchase it? But if you start incenting it with value, with things of value, things that cost money, and you're making them free, that's paying them to try the alcohol. And in this particular state, a code that's written this way, that's prohibited. Additionally, employees may wear branded wearables and account. They can use logoed coasters and napkins and stuff, but on the day of the event only. So if you're wondering if this is wired a little tight, it is. This is one of the more nitpicky promotional set of regulations that I'm aware of. There are a few other states that are kind of in this category that I know of, but some states, it's a free-for-all. So, and these may change from time to time. I think the main takeaway I want to say is there are rules to promoting alcohol at retail, and they are strict when it comes to providing anything of value and linking value to sale of alcohol. So one would want to move forward with measured steps and make sure, if you're self-distributing, then this is kind of on you to make sure you understand the rules and that you registered, et cetera. And if you're going through a wholesaler, then there's collaboration here available. So now you have somebody who's experienced has done this with many different brands, has probably seen it done right and seen it done poorly and seen it been enforced or not. And so you have a partner there that can really, that you want to be in step with. And if you're managing any gray area, you want agreement so that, because if you're sold to a retailer through a wholesaler, you're both on the hook. So you don't want to be doing an event that the wholesaler doesn't know about. And then one little rule was broken, and it just so happened somebody from the MLCC was there. Now you get a citation, and the wholesaler saying, I didn't know anything about it. So they can't really help you. And they may be a little upset that they were left out of that they were exposed without knowing it, because they delivered that alcohol. So they're sort of involved, aware or not. So, my point is to be aware of it and be conscious and be as ready as possible. I have one more point, which is a really tricky thing. When you take this out of the sort of the classroom and bullet point setting and into the real world, the problem is you're going to see 100 examples where these aren't followed. And you're going to say, why, how is that possible? Well, one of the ways it's possible is a lack of enforcement, a lack of knowledge on the producer's parts, and people just doing it either out of ignorance or and in a very neutral sense of the word, they just don't know, or out of an unwillingness or a belief that nobody's enforcing it. So I'm not going to register every promotion. And so that's done a lot. And I want to say it's up to the brand owner to sort of decide where you're going to live with that and what you're going to do. But watching the examples in the marketplace my main point is that watching somebody do it in the marketplace does not mean it's legal. Plain and simple. You make your own decisions about which gray areas you want to play in, which rules do you think are essential, and which ones may not be. A wholesaler friend of mine, and I'm not encouraging bending necessarily, but I'm conscious of the fact that it's such a regulated industry and there's so many things that it's very difficult. Don't expect a perfect record that you're not going to break a rule. It's going to happen on accident at some point. A wholesaler friend of mine used to say, I turn the key to the front door in the morning and I know we're breaking a law somewhere. I just don't know where. So we try to make sure we're not doing anything intentionally and that we're aware as much as possible. And then that we trap for and correct the ones we do find out about. So he just had this acceptance of like, we have, here's a big multi-county wholesaler. They got hundreds of employees. They have wine and beer. So they've got probably hundreds of brands. Is every promotion that ever went through that wholesaler registered? I can guarantee you not. But they also didn't flaunt that and say, we're outlaws. We don't follow the rules, because that would put their entire business in jeopardy. So just recognize that and try to identify the big things. And I've always coached to follow the intent of the law and recognize that if you break one rule or two that's in the fine print that you maybe didn't know was happening or you didn't understand it, there's going to be a lot of room for that in terms of processing a violation. But if you were blatantly going against the intent of the law, knowingly saying, I didn't think that rule mattered enough, and so I did it. If that's expressed by your actions, I would expect a much harsher review by somebody if they came across that. So that's partly here explanation of what all this is, with a little bit of advice from the years. So in Michigan, salespeople are required to hold a salesperson's license. That includes merchandisers. Merchandisers is a term for, could be brewer or wholesaler, but it's typically a wholesaler employee who doesn't have a responsibility to the order taking and presentation of brands, but they're going into the account, they're putting up signs, they're merchandising the account, They might be stocking shelves. They might be doing some other stuff. They are required to hold a salesperson license. So basically, another way to look at that is if a brand agent is going in and out of retailers, providing, fulfilling a duty, providing a service, the state would like to have them in their system. And as of 2018, there's a program that needs to be completed to get that license, and there's a fee. So that means that if you're a brewery owner and you're heading into accounts to sell your beer, it doesn't matter what your business card says. In the state's eyes, you're a salesperson. So you want to get this license for anybody that's heading into the retail trade. On-premise licensees are required to have a minimum of one trained person during the hours of alcohol served. So that's, some examples of those programs are here: TIPS, TAM, ServSafe. So that could change over time, but looking on the MLCC site for, who are the authorized training programs that my serving staff can be trained in. So reality of only needing one trained supervisory person on site is a legality. My suggestion would be to have as many servers as you can manage to go through this. It's a small cost. It's very helpful. And if you go back to that idea of you have anywhere from, you could be a small company with 4 employees or 20 or 200, but once you have more than you serving alcohol, it only takes one mistake to get a citation and have to go appear in front of the state liquor commission and defend your license. And if that mistake was, I guess I'm taking a soapbox moment for health and safety as well. If that mistake was over serving somebody or serving somebody that came in overserved, and then they go out and cause an accident or a fatality, that one mistake could be your license. So having as many people familiar with the method, being aware of what the rules are and the methods to manage consumption for consumers is really good advice. It doesn't mean something bad couldn't happen, but I will, again, sort of in the advice category, if something bad does happen and you have a really robust system to have tried to prevent that from happening, then you have a very reasonable defense of your license, saying, this is a terrible thing to happen, but we can demonstrate a lack of negligence because here's our training program. Here's how often we do X, Y, or Z. So we did everything, we did above and beyond of what was required by license to prevent the sort of thing, and it's just an unfortunate accident. That's an argument I would prefer to be making in that setting versus, well, we had one person as law required, but it wasn't the person that served him. So I think, and again, if you go back to intent versus code, the nice thing about this is that if staff gets hired and hasn't gone through the training yet, you're not in violation as long as somebody on staff is. And if you're saying, hey, listen, the manager is the one who's going to make these calls. So if you have any discomfort about age or serving or X, Y, or Z, bring the manager in. They're trained. And then you have time to develop your staff and get them trained. So I look at this as sort of a transitional opportunity to not be in violation while you train more staff members. But that's an opinion more than code.
Keep an incident log too.
Yes.
That saved our butts. When we turn someone, if you turn someone away, have someone write it down because we got accused of over serving someone, and then between, showing that the transaction didn't happen with their credit card, but also saying someone wrote down that they turned this guy away, we did not serve him, helped us a lot. So recommend that.
Absolutely. And you don't know when it's going to come back. So an incident log can help if it's 2 weeks later and somebody's saying, hey, this thing happened. And through the investigation, it came up that you were one of the places they drank at. We'd like to know what happened on Tuesday, February 8th. That's hard to go from memory on. So if you have a log and protocols where that's happening every day, you're going to be not only more comfortable, you're going to appear responsible and professional in the investigator's eyes. And this goes way back a long time, but I'm aware of a story at a brew pub where they declined service to somebody who came in overserved, and they gave him a glass of water and let him stay. And they were cited and the citation held after the hearing that they were in violation for not asking that person to leave, not requiring that person to leave the premises. So even allowing an intoxicated person to stay on the premise was a violation in that particular situation. I didn't agree with it, but it's what happened.
Was that recently?
No, it was a long time ago. No, it was a long time ago. I'm trying to think of what year it was, but I don't know. So, and I don't know where the code is on that. It's just, and it, I can't even remember why it came up, but it was a mess. It was a smaller brewery that didn't have a lot of protocols, and, you know, going back to what really happened, there was no log. There was a bartender who now had to go to Lansing, and it was terrible. But it would have been less terrible with more protocols in place. And that's my point here. All right. So as if it wasn't enough, there's advertising regulations. So you've heard me say at the beginning of this class, you know, week one, that we're in a highly regulated industry. So there's rules about what signs you can use. There's rules about printed glassware in Michigan that are allowed during promotions and not otherwise because they're considered a thing of value. There used to be no neon lights allowed in the state of Michigan. The Michigan Licensed Beverage Association campaigned against that with a freedom of speech argument. And eventually those were allowed with certain exceptions. So I don't think it's a place to try to go through each one of these, but to give you the idea that promotion and advertising, especially when it comes to, if you're giving an expensive sign to a retailer, it's no longer an advertisement. It's an expensive sign that they didn't pay for, that was given to them by someone who has a branded relationship with them, right? So you remember going back to tied house laws. Why do tied house laws exist? So the manufacturer can't have undue influence on the retailer because of financial exchange. So some of these advertising rules are about preventing a workaround to that tied house law of, well, I don't own the place. I just gave them a $10,000 draft system and said, kick all the other beers out. I just, gave them $10,000 in radio advertising for free. I don't own them, but I kicked out my competitors by giving them monetary value through the side door of advertising or merchandise or equipment. So I have been perennially frustrated by many of these rules. I was also at breweries that were perennially protected by these rules because in this state, which is pretty tight, we didn't have the big brewers giving away beer for nothing because there's no volume discounting. We didn't have them buying draft handles with neon signs because they weren't allowed. This don't give anything of value and no co-op advertising and registering promotions and all this stuff can feel really limiting. And some of it is either poorly written or no longer as relevant as it once was, if it was. But it's also a framework of keeping big producers with deep pockets from keeping us from market, keeping the small producers from market. So don't throw it all out as overwritten garbage. Feel free to be frustrated and you know, wrestle with it and find out how to navigate within it, and still be and find your flexibility and find the legal workarounds and all that stuff. But I just want to say that idea of no rules would be difficult as well. And when I went to Belgium for the first time, which I had, you know, we'd all learned was Mecca. Belgium is one of the homes of, you know, historic beer traditions. And I couldn't find, there were lots of little breweries I wanted to visit or see or try their beer. And going through the bars and tap houses in the city, none of them were on tap. This goes a while back, but none of them were on tap. It was all InBev. It was all the acquired breweries. It was all these international brands. I was talking to one small brewery a little bit out of town. I'd scheduled a tour with them and I wasn't going to be able to make it. Our plans had changed. And I called and said, hey, I'm not going to be able to make it. I'd love to drink your beer. I'd love to support you though and drink your beer. Where can I get it in town? And the response was, our beer is not sold in town. It's mostly export. It's either at the brewery or the US. And I was fascinated and depressed. But the reality was our regulations, our 3-tier system and tied house laws in the US allowed for the renaissance of the craft beer movement to even have an opportunity to happen. And here in the home of some of the most remarkable beers in the world, little breweries were either going out of business or were limited to selling out to export, not even sold in their hometown. So that was an example of a robust beer industry without any protections, and it was not pretty. So that's, again, a little more insight into some of it is frustrating, but it's also what allowed us to exist. So that is the slides for regulatory environment. I just put this last slide up. We've got midterm next week. I thought we'd allow some Q&A about this week and about the quiz now, instead of trying to add midterm prep to this. And the quiz sort of serves as a bit of midterm prep. It's covering a bulk of this half of semester. But I also don't think you need 2 hours to take the midterm next week. So this is open to input from you all if you have opinions on this. I thought we could do midterm Q&A, sort of questions or review for either a half hour or an hour, as long as is needed. If everything feels answered and you guys all say we're good, you can start the midterm then or by 7. And then you have an hour class time to take the midterm, and I'll leave the test up until 9. So if you happen to need 2 hours, it's there for you. Does anybody, and then we have no class the following week. And then apparently division of Labo is week 7. So I guess first off, what do you guys think about midterm prep in the first 30 to 60 minutes of next week? Any opinions, yay or nay? Looks like yays.
I would like it.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. And then any questions on regulatory environment this week, which will not be on the quiz, but it will be on the midterm?
You know, it just seems like this whole thing of, you know, are you a wholesaler? Are you a distributor? Are you a manufacturer? Are you a retail? It just seems like there's so many things that bleed over from one thing to the other. I think if you were a brewer and you wanted to go and promote your, you know, your handle at a particular bar, and you were self-distributing, or are you selling through a distributor? I mean, it just seems like a real quagmire to get into. But, I guess, you just have to try to, I guess once you decide what you are, you just have to power through it and see what happens.
That's right. And some of the advice I've given to frustrated salespeople is, well, they made this all illegal at one point. So here we are, we're selling and drinking alcohol. We just got to navigate the system. And, I think, related to a Q&A from a week or two ago is that in terms of most of it's frequently written by legislators who aren't manufacturers or not. It's not, there's, especially when you get into the regs, right? The regulatory environment are rules written by the Liquor Commission. Laws and license types and things that go through the legislator are usually written by organizations that are lobbying legislators. They may have to educate that legislator, but they're saying, here, we'll help you write the code. Here's what we think would apply. And we've worked it with the Wholesaler Association, the Brewers Association. I have agreed on this language, like that Craft Modernization Act we talked about. There's no question that producers and producer lobbyists are involved in making sure that that's relevant. When it comes to state or local organizations saying, here's the rules for promotion, those don't require legislative change. Those are rules that are voted on by Liquor Control Commission. So it can be done a little bit more in a silo by people who don't know what it's like to be a producer. So the rules and regs have a little more likelihood of being off base or sort of poorly written from a producer's point of view, because they don't have to go through the same vetting process. But they can hurt just as much if you break them. So you got to find a way.
I guess at the local level, I mean, I've gone to my city, and I live in Livonia, and I've gone in, and I know about the thing about Kroger's wanted to bring in, spirits on the shelf, that people could just pick up, and there was a family that had a liquor store for generations in Livonia, and they put a stop to it because of the family connections. But I really do think that I've gone to on several different issues to the city council and state reps, and they've just really, oh wow, I never heard about this. I mean, they didn't have a clue. And so I just think, especially, I think Hannah has talked about this before, but just call up your state rep and just go and talk to them, make an appointment, go up to Lansing, go sit in their office with them, and educate them. Because it's exactly like you say, legislatures are there for our representation, and but we got to put the effort into going to talk to them.
Right, and they don't necessarily. There's no assumption of one shouldn't assume that they know all these rules you're working under. They don't. That new commissioner may not know the promotion rules, so you may need to educate the people around you about something that's viewed as an obstruction. It may start out by saying, hey, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this rule, but it's really an impedance for me, and I just need to talk to somebody about it. And oh, I didn't know that was happening. Well, let's see who we could talk to. Like, getting somebody on your side starts with just laying out, here's how this works, and here's why it's difficult for me. I'm following it, but registering every promotion is a real drag, and then see what happens next. And, it all depends. But I would say, in terms of this week's topic and regulatory environment, and that important point of recognizing it all the way down to your local, even though they're not going to, you may have a business license locally, but your alcohol licenses are state and federal. Your local community is going to determine whether you can get that license. So I would say education starts in the business planning, if you have an idea of a location in your vision, I can think of a few scenarios where I might be close to my vest. If there were somebody that I thought were a competitor on the planning commission, I may not want to tell them all my plans. But aside from that, it's never, I was going to say it's never too early to, if you have a relationship or if you don't, to say, hey, I just want to introduce myself. Might be a few years, but I've got this idea for a business in this community and I just want to make you aware of it. Get your input, see what you think. And then at some point when it comes time to like, I need your approval, you're not somebody out of left field with an idea that they had never imagined. Well, I never thought about a distillery in this town. So I got to like process that first before I can say yes. Where if 2 years prior, you know, in a non-COVID story, if you went to lunch or something and said, I'm just imagining this and would love your input as a local official, then by the time you come around to say, hey, listen, I need approval, they're like, oh, this is that thing you're talking about. How cool, it's come to life. And if they had any concerns like, well, the thing that scares me about a distillery is, they could tell you that prior to you needing their vote or needing their stamp. And you could address their concerns either through education, through familiarity, or weaving it into your plan of like, oh, well, now that I know that you're concerned, I could solve that by like, you know, for somebody, it could be like a waste stream. So when I come with my plans, I'm going to have waste stream identified and solved before they ask for it, because they told me 2 years ago, main thing I worry about in that area is there's no sewer, right? Or I'm just making stuff up, but that conversation can start early, and that allows them time to give you input and allows them time to settle with the idea, lets their vision of their community start to include you. So again, I go back to last week. Well, last week's assignment and the visioning, allowing other people to start visioning, including you. So if a township board just has had time to chew on the idea, they're much more likely to see it as a positive. Now, if you have a known opponent, I think the same advice goes that you are going to need to start earlier. Just be careful with what you share, so they don't take something in your plan and use it against you. I'm not a very sky is falling. I'm a sharer and an optimist, but there's a time to play poker. Anybody else?
I know this is a little far ahead because we're going to do some midterm review next week, but I am a study guide sort of person. I have to write things down to commit them to memory. And I just didn't know if you could offer any insight on formatting for the exam, or I don't know, something to help me study that I can do on my own time, just so I can focus a little bit. Because it seems like, at least with the one quiz, you know, we had the PowerPoint with the bullet points and everything to reference, but then in a couple of questions, we had to elaborate on something that you had talked about in class, but it wasn't necessarily referenced in the PowerPoint. So just wanted a little help with formatting.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I do not have a midterm guide prepared at this point. But I would say that it's going to emulate the quizzes. There may be some fill and, you know, some, I don't see any long form essays, but I would like to have you recall from memory versus, you know, I'll include some true and false, and there might be some multiple choice. But in general, I also want you to be able to state an answer about certain things. And so what I've found is that from the Blackboard format, essay type of question is the easiest technical way to allow you to type your answer without it being formatted to like fill in the blank or one word or so I don't know if that helps, but I'm also learning the platform a little bit. So there are some adjustments happening. So I don't know if that's enough, but I would expect a combination of true, false, multiple choice, text answer.
Fred, I guess it's more of a process or systems question on this being able to take the test again. Like if we get a wrong answer, we can try to read through it and take another shot at it. I don't understand how we can get the the questions that we got wrong and how we can take another shot at it, like the second chance thing.
So on the last quiz, did it tell you which questions you got wrong?
I was not able to locate that, no.
Anybody else?
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
Okay. So it should tell you which ones you got wrong, but not tell you the answer. If I've checked the right boxes. And so then you can at least go back through, and I hadn't quite decided about the midterm, about a second pass. I'm inclined to offer it because I'm a softie, and I'd rather you digest the information, and that wrong answer is an opportunity for you to see an area that you might want to dig into and refresh. And I'm more, I guess I'm just sharing my perspective. I'm more invested in you getting the information digested than taking points off. So with that, I think I just made the decision. I will allow a second attempt at the midterm, and you should see which answers were wrong, but not the answer. Hannah, is that enough, or are you looking for more of a guide?
Well, I think I was just if there were like some broader topics, because sometimes you would talk about, a particular law or I don't know, a particular event in time, but then, we're supposed to describe the relationship between like the Whiskey Rebellion and taxation and ingredient availability. And, there was a lot of things to pull from. And so I guess it would just be helpful if I knew like what relationships I should study. Like it's my job to explain it, but like these are the type of things that I should, think about and research so that I can elaborate properly that might not be offered in the class materials.
Yeah. Well, I'll say that generally speaking, the bullet points and whatever is on the slides is the bulk of the material. I won't guarantee that there won't be some other relational thoughts that I think if you have a handle on what was presented, you'd be able to answer. But I think the bulk of the material is going to be drawn from the text on the slides. So I would be prepared for both, but I'm not planning on a big essay, tell me your thoughts on it. I'm leaving that for, I'm just saying more of that stuff is in the assignments and in the projects versus the tests.
Gotcha. Thank you. That helps.
And I think if I do short answer stuff, which there's some this week, short answer is giving you the opportunity to phrase it or to get close and still be right without having to know the exact word I used. So I see it as an opportunity to tell me what you think instead of regurgitate the exact sentence. And so if you're not sure, I would just, instead of trying to go from memory, I would try to tell me what you believe to be true about that topic. Make sense?
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Well, does anybody have any other questions? with that, we've only eaten 6 minutes of your quiz time. But like I said, it's up until 9. And let me know if you have any trouble with it. Everything should be working fine. But if it malfunctions, just send me a note, an email, and I'll check that in a little bit. And everybody have a great night. Happy Lundi Gras and happy Mardi Gras tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good night, everybody.
Yep. Nope.
Good night.
Good night.